That baby has to go. The scream cut through the quiet morning. Karen, the HOA president, stood on the lawn yelling at a young mother holding her newborn. But what she didn't know was that the baby's father, the man stepping out of that house, was a retired Navy SEAL. He'd fought wars overseas, but nothing prepared him for this. When Karen tried to have their baby taken away, he decided to fight back, not with fists, but with discipline, honor, and truth. And by the end, this Navy SEAL didn't just silence Karen. He destroyed her reign of control over the entire neighborhood. Welcome to BrainFuel, where real stories meet real emotion, where heroes aren't just found in uniforms, but in everyday moments of courage. From hidden heroes to powerful comebacks, these are the stories that remind you the most powerful battles are often the ones fought at home. The screaming started before sunrise. The air was still cool, the street quiet, and the early morning light painted the white fences in gold. But peace never lasted long on Magnolia Ridge Drive, not when Karen lived there. The sound of her shrill voice pierced through the neighborhood like an alarm clock no one asked for. She wasn't shouting at a barking dog or a misplaced trash can this time. No, today she found a new crime to punish, a newborn baby. "That baby is to go," she yelled, clutching her clipboard like it was a weapon. Curtains fluttered as sleepy neighbors peeked from behind them, shaking their heads. Some were too scared to interfere. Others just muttered under their breath, "She's lost her mind." But one man, still inside the house at the center of her rage, was about to change everything. His name was Mark Dalton, a retired U.S. Navy SEAL, a man who had survived war zones, storms, and missions that broke lesser men. Yet, on that peaceful street, he was about to face something he'd never trained for, an HOA president with a God complex. Mark didn't hear her right away. He was in the nursery, gently rocking his newborn daughter Lily in his arms. The baby's tiny fingers curled around his thumb as he hummed a lullaby he used to sing to calm his nerves on long deployments. His wife, Emily, finally sleeping after a restless night, lay in the next room. The house smelled like baby lotion and fresh paint. A new start, a new life. Mark had dreamed of this for years. After 15 years of service, countless missions, and too many sleepless nights overseas, he just wanted normal. A small home, a quiet yard, his family safe. When they bought the house 2 weeks ago, the neighborhood had seemed perfect. Beautiful lawns, friendly faces, tree-lined streets. A place where Lily could grow up without fear. But peace, as Mark was about to learn, can sometimes attract the most unexpected enemies. Outside, Karen marched up the Daltons' driveway with the intensity of a commander on a mission. Her perfectly pressed blouse, oversized sunglasses, and tightly curled hair were her armor. The clipboard in her hand held the HOA regulations, which she quoted like scripture. She believed she was protecting the neighborhood's standards. What she was really doing was terrorizing it. "Do you hear that?" she snapped at a passing jogger, pointing toward a faint sound of Lily's cries coming from an open window. "Unacceptable noise level. We have rules here." The jogger gave a nervous laugh. "Karen, it's just a baby." "Just a baby?" she interrupted, her face twisting. "Rules are rules. Babies cry, fine, but they can cry inside, where no one else has to hear it. This is a peaceful community." The jogger sped off, not want to get involved. Karen smirked. In her mind, she was restoring order. She rang the Daltons' doorbell once, then twice, then a third time, harder each time. Inside, the noise startled Emily awake. She rushed to the door, still in her robe, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. When she opened it, Karen was standing there with her signature fake smile. "Good morning, dear," Karen said sweetly. "I'm afraid we need to have a little chat about your baby." Emily blinked, confused. "My baby?" Karen's tone shifted instantly. "Yes, the crying. It's been reported as a disturbance by several residents. We have quiet hours between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m., and your little one has been rather vocal." Emily stared in disbelief. She's a newborn. She doesn't know what time it is. Karen tilted her head, feigning sympathy. "I understand, but we can't make exceptions. Rules are what keep this community beautiful. Perhaps you could take her somewhere else when she cries? Maybe your car?" Or even better, a soundproof room? Tears welled in Emily's eyes. She wasn't used to confrontation, especially not like this. "Ma'am, I'm doing my best. She's only 2 weeks old." But Karen had already scribbled something on her clipboard. "I'll be sending a formal notice of violation. You'll have 7 days to comply." And with that, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking like gunfire against the driveway. Emily closed the door slowly, her hands shaking. She looked at the baby monitor. Lily had stopped crying. Then she looked at the paper Karen had just slid into her hand. Noise violation, Section 12B, repeated disturbances caused by occupants. She couldn't believe it. A baby was being treated like a nuisance. A few minutes later, Mark came out of the nursery carrying Lily, humming softly. When he saw Emily's face, he knew something was wrong. "Hey," he said gently. "What happened?" She held out the paper, her voice trembling. "That woman, the HOA lady, she said Lily's crying is against the rules. She said our baby is disturbing the peace." Mark read the letter silently, his jaw tightening. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he folded the paper in half, placed it on the counter, and kissed Emily on the forehead. "Don't worry," he said quietly. "I'll handle this." His voice was calm, but beneath it, something powerful stirred, the same unshakable resolve that had carried him through war. Outside, Karen stood across the street, pretending to check her rose bushes, but really waiting to see their reaction. When she saw Mark walk out moments later, tall, composed, and carrying himself with that quiet authority, her confidence faltered just a little. "Morning," he said evenly. "You're the HOA president, right?" Karen straightened up. "That's correct. And you must be Mr. Dalton. I was just explaining to your wife that we have certain expectations here." Mark looked her straight in the eye. "My wife doesn't need explaining, and my daughter doesn't need your approval to cry." Karen blinked, surprised by his tone. "I'm only doing my job, sir." Mark's expression didn't change. "Then do it right, because if you think harassing new parents is part of your job, you've misunderstood what leadership means." Before she could respond, he turned and walked back toward the house, closing the door gently behind him. Karen stood frozen for a moment, cheeks burning. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. In her mind, she was untouchable. But that morning, something inside her twisted. Anger, bruised ego, maybe even fear. She muttered under her breath, "We'll see about that, soldier." And with that, she stormed off, already plotting her next move. What she didn't realize was that she had just picked a fight with a man who didn't fight for pride, power, or ego. He fought for family. And this time, his mission was crystal clear: protect what mattered most, no matter the cost. For most people, home is a place to rest. For Mark Dalton, it was supposed to be a new beginning. After 15 years of service as a Navy SEAL, Mark had seen more chaos than any man ever should. He'd lived through explosions, ambushes, and storms in foreign lands. But nothing compared to the peace he'd felt the day he held his daughter Lily for the first time. He and his wife Emily had spent months searching for the right neighborhood, a safe, quiet place to raise their child. And when they found a little house on Magnolia Ridge Drive, it felt perfect. Clean lawns, friendly smiles, wide sidewalks shaded by oak trees. It was everything they dreamed of, but on the day they moved in, a few things already felt off. It started with the clipboard lady. While the moving truck was still in the driveway, Emily had noticed a woman standing at the end of the street, staring. Not watching, evaluating. She wore oversized sunglasses, her lips pressed tight, and her arms folded like she was judging every box they unloaded. A golden badge pinned to her chest read, HOA President. "That's her," whispered one of the neighbors helping them move. "That's Karen. Don't get on her bad side." Emily had laughed it off at the time. But when Karen finally introduced herself, the laugh quickly disappeared. "Hello," Karen said, flashing a stiff smile. "Welcome to Magnolia Ridge. I'm in charge of keeping this neighborhood orderly. You'll find the community handbook in your mailbox." Mark, polite as always, shook her hand. "Appreciate it. We'll make sure to go through it." Karen's eyes flicked to the truck. I just hope you'll keep your garage organized. We like things neat here. That was her first warning, and she hadn't even said welcome yet. The days that followed were filled with the chaos of settling in. Emily spent hours unpacking baby clothes and arranging the nursery, while Mark fixed the fence and mowed the lawn. He didn't mind the work. After all, he was used to structure and discipline. But the way Karen hovered around made it feel less like a neighborhood and more like a surveillance zone. Every day, she passed by their house, pretending to walk her tiny dog, a yappy little thing named Princess Buttercup, but she never actually let walk far. Instead, she'd stop near the Daltons' mailbox, glance around, and jot something down on her clipboard. At first, Mark ignored it. He'd dealt with tougher people in war zones. But when he found a note taped to their trash bin reading, "Bins must be concealed from street view at all times," HOA warning number 1, he began to realize this wasn't just nosiness. This was control. A few days later came warning number 2, unauthorized decorations, remove flag immediately. It was an American flag, a small one, neatly mounted by the front door. Mark stared at the note for a long time, disbelief turning slowly into anger. That flag wasn't decoration. It was a symbol of everything he'd fought for. Emily tried to calm him. Let's just talk to her. Maybe she doesn't realize you're a veteran. Mark smiled faintly. Oh, she realizes. That's the problem. Karen didn't stop there. When Mark started his truck early one morning to run for groceries, she appeared at his window in her robe. "Excuse me," she shouted. "Do you have to leave your engine running for so long? It disturbs the air quality." Mark sighed. "Ma'am, it's been on for 30 seconds. "Well, that's 30 seconds too long," she snapped. "The HOA takes these matters seriously." He bit back his irritation. "I'll keep that in mind." Then he drove off, shaking his head. What Mark didn't realize was that Karen had already written another letter that morning, this time about excessive noise during restricted hours. By the end of the week, the Daltons' mailbox had more HOA letters than mail. Emily tried to stay positive, telling herself it would blow over, but the stress started to show. Lily's crying made her anxious now, not because of the baby, but because of Karen. Every whimper made Emily jump, afraid that another complaint would appear. One afternoon, she sat on the porch, trying to feed Lily, when Karen appeared again, this time with that same cold expression. "You might want to close that window when she cries," Karen said casually. "Sound carries." Emily blinked, stunned. "She's just a baby." Karen smiled. "We all have to do our part for community peace." Then she turned and walked away. That was the moment Emily realized this woman wasn't just strict. She was cruel. Later that evening, when Mark returned from the grocery store, he found Emily on the couch, holding Lily tightly, tears in her eyes. The baby monitor beside her showed their daughter peacefully asleep. He sat beside her, setting down the bags. "What's wrong?" Emily handed him a folded piece of paper. She came by again, said Lily's crying is disturbing the neighborhood. She told me to close the windows. Mark read it. It wasn't an official warning this time, but a handwritten note. Still, the arrogance in it boiled his blood. He took a deep breath. "I'm going to talk to her." Emily grabbed his arm. "Mark, please, don't make things worse." He looked at her gently. "Sweetheart, I've dealt with worse. But no one, and I mean no one, makes you cry over our baby." The next morning, the sun hadn't even burned to the clouds when Karen started her patrol again, clipboard in hand. Coffee in the other, she strutted down the street like a queen inspecting her kingdom. When she reached the Daltons' driveway, she froze. Mark was there, already waiting, leaning against the hood of his truck, arms crossed. "Morning," he said calmly. Karen straightened her shoulders. "Mr. Dalton, I hope you're following the guidelines now." Mark stepped closer, his tone still even. "You've been giving my wife a hard time. That stops today." Karen smirked. "I'm just doing my job. If you can't handle living by our rules." Mark cut her off, his eyes narrowing just enough to make her step back. "I've handled things you can't even imagine, but I'm not here to fight. I'm here to tell you that my daughter's cries aren't a violation. They're the sound of life. You don't get to silence that. For a moment, Karen didn't know what to say. The authority in his voice shook her, but pride kept her from backing down. Well, she said stiffly, if you want to discuss this, you can bring it up at the next HOA meeting. I will, Mark replied, and I'll bring the rest of the neighborhood with me. He turned and walked back into the house, leaving her standing there, furious and humiliated. That night, as the Daltons sat together feeding Lily, Emily looked at her husband and whispered, "What are you going to do?" Mark smiled slightly. "Something I'm very good at," he said, "understanding the rules, so I can use them better than the people who abuse them." And as the moonlight shone through the nursery window, the calm look in his eyes returned. The look of a man who'd faced danger before and always found a way to win. Karen had no idea, but she hadn't just picked on another neighbor. She had declared war on a Navy SEAL, and this was one battle she was destined to lose. It started small, just whispers, notes, and complaints that seemed more annoying than dangerous. But what began as petty neighborhood nitpicking was about to explode into something far uglier. And it all began on a quiet Thursday afternoon, when the soft cries of a newborn drifted out through an open window. Inside the house, Emily Dalton sat in the nursery rocking little Lily, humming gently as sunlight filtered through the curtains. The baby's tiny chest rose and fell against her shoulder, her cries sharp but innocent, the kind every new mother knows too well. It wasn't loud. It wasn't constant. It was just life. But for Karen, the self-appointed queen of the Magnolia Ridge HOA, it was unacceptable. Karen was standing outside, pretending to check the flowers in her front yard, when she heard it, that high-pitched wail, that sound that pierced through her illusion of control. She froze, her manicured hands tightening around her pruning shears. "Oh, not again," she muttered, glaring at the Dalton house. Do they have no respect for community? Her dog, Princess Buttercup, tilted her head and yapped once. "Exactly," Karen said as the dog agreed. "Rules are rules." She stormed inside, grabbed her HOA binder, and began flipping through the pages. She'd memorized most of them, of course. She wrote half the rules herself, but she loved the ritual of it. Finally, she landed on what she was looking for. Section 9A, Noise and Community Disturbances. Excessive, prolonged, or unnecessary noise, she read aloud, tapping the line with her pen. A smirk crossed her lips. Perfect. To Karen, this wasn't harassment. It was heroism. She saw herself as the last line of defense against chaos. And if chaos came in the form of a crying baby, so be it. She threw on her sun hat, adjusted her sunglasses, and marched across the street. The neighborhood was quiet enough that every click of her heels echoed. A few neighbors peeked out from their windows, whispering. They knew that walk. It meant trouble. Inside, Emily was still trying to calm Lily when the doorbell rang. At first, she ignored it. Then it rang again. And again, louder, longer, impatient. "Coming!" she called out, shifting Lily carefully into her crib before hurrying down the hallway. She opened the door, expecting maybe a delivery. Instead, she was met with the sharp, unblinking face of Karen. "Good afternoon," Karen began, her voice clipped and official. "I'm afraid we need to discuss an issue." Emily blinked, confused. "An issue?" "Yes." Karen tapped her clipboard. "The noise coming from your property. It's been reported multiple times." Emily frowned. "Noise? You mean the baby?" Karen nodded firmly. "Yes. Unfortunately, your baby's crying has become disruptive to the neighborhood." Emily's jaw dropped slightly. She's 2 weeks old. Babies cry. Karen sighed dramatically, as though she were the victim. "I understand, dear, but the HOA has quiet hours between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. And even during the day, we ask residents to be mindful of sound levels. Some people work from home, you know." Emily tried to keep her voice steady. "I'm not throwing a party, Karen. I'm trying to raise a newborn. You can't expect silence." Karen raised an eyebrow. "Well, we expect cooperation. Perhaps you could close your windows. Or move her crib to a different room. I've even heard of parents taking their babies for car rides until they calm down." Emily stared at her, speechless. Are you serious? Karen smiled that icy smile. Completely. We all have to make sacrifices for the good of the community. Emily's hands trembled as she gripped the doorknob. I'm doing my best. I'm exhausted. My baby barely sleeps. And now you're... Karen interrupted, her tone sharpening. Ma'am, I don't make the rules. I enforce them. If the noise continues, I'll have no choice but to issue a violation notice. She scribbled something on her clipboard and tore off a sheet. Here, consider this your first warning. Emily stared down at the paper. Noise violation, infraction level 1. It looked like a parking ticket. For a baby. When she looked up again, Karen was already walking down the driveway, her heels clicking rhythmically. Thank you for your cooperation, she called out without turning back. The door closed softly, but inside, Emily felt something crack. She stood in silence for a moment, staring at the note in her hand, then looked at Lily's baby monitor glowing on the table. Her voice wavered as she whispered, I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Mommy didn't mean to make people upset. Her chest ached, not just from exhaustion, but from helplessness. She sat down on the couch, holding the paper like it might burn her fingers. An hour later, the sound of a car door closing broke the stillness. Mark was home. He walked into the living room carrying grocery bags and instantly noticed a tension in the air. Emily didn't even look up. Lily was asleep in her arms, her tiny hand clutching her mother's robe. What happened? He asked quietly. Emily handed him the notice, her eyes red. She came again, said Lily's crying breaks HOA rules. She told me to take her for car rides when she cries. Mark read the paper once, slowly. Then again, his jaw tightened and a cold calm settled over his face, the kind his teammates used to see before a mission. He folded the paper neatly, set it on the counter, and asked softly, Did she upset you? Emily nodded, tears brimming. She said she'd fine us. For crying. For our baby crying, Mark. Who does that? He reached out, resting his hand on her shoulder. Someone who's never been told no, he said quietly. Mark's voice was low, controlled, but inside his blood was boiling. Years of discipline kept him from exploding, but every word Karen had said played in his mind. To him, this wasn't just rudeness. It was disrespect toward his wife, his child, and the peace he'd fought for. Outside, across the street, Karen stood on her porch sipping coffee. She could see the Daltons' front door through her sunglasses. Some people just don't fit in, she muttered. Rules exist for a reason. She didn't notice that Mark was already standing in his doorway, watching her. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes told another story, a mix of strength and quiet warning. He didn't say a word. Not yet, but the line had been crossed. And in that moment, Mark decided that the next time Karen came after his family, she wouldn't be met with tears. She'd be met with truth, and the kind of strength that no clipboard could control. Because when you stare down war and walk through fire, the last thing that scares you is a Karen with a rule book. That night, as the streetlights flickered on and the world went still, Emily whispered from their bed, Do you think she'll stop? Mark stared out the window at the empty street. No, he said quietly. People like her never stop. They need to be stopped. And somewhere across the street, Karen smiled to herself, completely unaware that she just started a battle she could never win. The sun rose slowly over Magnolia Ridge Drive, casting golden light over neat lawns, trimmed hedges, and identical white fences. To anyone passing by, the street looked perfect, quiet, peaceful, the picture of suburban comfort. But inside the Dalton house, peace had turned into something else. Quiet fury. Mark stood in the kitchen, one hand resting on the folded letter from the HOA. He'd read it a dozen times already. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was an insult. His baby daughter's crying, labeled as a noise violation. His wife's tears dismissed as disturbance. He glanced toward the nursery door, where Emily was rocking Lily to sleep. The baby's soft breathing and the rhythmic creak of the chair filled the silence. Mark exhaled slowly. Years of military discipline had taught him to stay calm under pressure. He'd survived ambushes, broken missions, and sleepless nights in deserts and jungles. He'd learned when to fight and when to wait. But this wasn't a battlefield filled with enemies. It was his home. And the person attacking his peace wasn't a soldier or a threat, just a woman with too much power and no compassion. Still, Mark knew something about bullies. They all crumble when you stand your ground. He looked at the clock. 8:30 a.m. Karen would be outside by now. She always was. Like clockwork. She did her morning patrol, walking her tiny dog, clipboard in hand, scanning for rule breakers like a hawk looking for prey. Mark straightened his shirt, checked on Emily once more, and stepped outside. The morning air was crisp, filled with a faint smell of freshly cut grass. He spotted Karen 3 houses down, standing by a neighbor's mailbox, scribbling notes. "Morning," Mark called out, his tone polite but steady. Karen turned, surprised. Her sunglasses hid her eyes, but her smirk gave her away. "Oh, Mr. Dalton, out early today. Thought I'd catch you before your patrol," he said. "We need to talk." Her smirk tightened. "If this is about the noise violation, I already spoke with your wife. You'll find the rules are quite clear." Mark took a slow step forward. "I read your letter, and I understand the rules. But there's something you need to understand, too." Karen's chin lifted. "And what's that?" "That baby you're talking about," Mark said, his voice even, "is my daughter. She's 2 weeks old. And you have no right to harass my wife over something so human." Karen crossed her arms, adopting that smug stance of authority she always used. "I'm not harassing anyone. I'm enforcing community standards. We have to maintain peace here. If everyone just did whatever they wanted, this neighborhood would fall apart." Mark's expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened. "Peace doesn't come from silence, Karen. It comes from respect. Something you seem to have forgotten." Her lips pressed tight. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," he said calmly. "My wife's been in tears because of your behavior. You came to our door, threatened her with fines, and treated a newborn like a nuisance. You don't get to do that." Karen gave a short, mocking laugh. "Oh, please. I'm not the villain here, Mr. Dalton. I'm simply doing my duty. If your family can't follow the rules, maybe this isn't the right neighborhood for you." Mark took a deep breath, holding back the storm that was building inside him. "You know," he said, his voice lower now, "I spent 15 years in the Navy. I've dealt with people who believed they had control over others. But in the real world, control means nothing without compassion. And right now you're abusing yours." For the first time, Karen's confidence wavered. She shifted slightly, adjusting her sunglasses. "I don't appreciate being spoken to like that. And I don't appreciate my family being treated like criminals for having a baby," Mark replied, his tone sharp but calm. "You think authority gives you the right to bully people, but it doesn't. You're supposed to help your community, not terrorize it." Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time, someone wasn't scared of her clipboard. Across the street, a neighbor watering his plants had paused, pretending to adjust his hose just to listen. Another woman jogging by slowed down, her eyes darting between them. The whole street seemed to go quiet, waiting to see what would happen next. Finally, Karen found her voice. "If you have a complaint about the HOA, you can file it properly through the board." "I already did," Mark said flatly. "I read the entire rulebook last night. Every section, every fine print. You've been misusing your authority. You've been handing out warnings without proper documentation, targeting people who don't push back." Karen blinked, taken aback. "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Mark said, taking another step closer. "Because I've already spoken to 3 neighbors who got fined for things that aren't even listed in the bylaws, like mailbox colors, holiday decorations, and," he paused, "the length of their grass." Karen's face went red. "I don't need to justify myself to you." "No," Mark said, "but you'll need to justify yourself to the community." She hesitated, her voice faltering for the first time. "What are you planning?" Mark smiled faintly. "Just a conversation. At the next HOA meeting. About leadership, fairness, and maybe, just maybe, what it means to be a decent neighbor." Karen tried to regain her composure. "You think you can embarrass me in front of everyone? Good luck. People here respect me." Mark tilted his head. "Do they? Or are they just afraid of you?" Karen's breath caught. She didn't have a response. Mark turned to leave, but before walking away, he stopped and looked back. You know, I joined the Navy because I believe in protecting people, especially the ones who can't fight for themselves. My wife didn't deserve what you did to her. My daughter didn't either. You might run this HOA, Karen, but you don't run us. And with that, he walked away, leaving Karen standing speechless on her perfectly trimmed lawn. When Mark stepped back inside, Emily was waiting by the window. You talked to her? She asked, nervous. He nodded. Yeah, I kept it civil. For now. She gave a small smile. Thank you. Mark kissed her forehead. We're not done yet, but she won't come near you again. As he turned off the lights, the quiet of the house returned. For the first time in days, Emily felt safe. But outside, in the dim glow of the streetlights, Karen stood on her porch, her face hard and furious. She wasn't used to being challenged, and she definitely wasn't used to losing control. Her voice was low, but filled with venom as she muttered to herself, "This isn't over." And as the night grew darker, one thing became certain. Karen might have started this war with a clipboard, but Mark was about to finish it with integrity, courage, and the kind of discipline that no suburban tyrant could ever match. Because when you fought real battles, you don't fear small ones. And for Mark Dalton, this one had just begun. The next morning, Mark woke up early. Not because of the baby this time, but because his instincts were back in full gear. His military training had taught him that every mission needed planning, intelligence, and patience. And if this neighborhood was his new battlefield, then Karen had just become the enemy commander. He poured himself a cup of coffee and opened his laptop. Emily was still asleep with baby Lily beside her, their soft breaths reminding him what he was fighting for. He wasn't going to yell or make a scene. No, he was going to dismantle Karen's power the same way he dismantled threats overseas. Quietly, methodically, and with precision, he started with the HOA website. At first glance, it looked simple: meeting dates, contact info, and a long list of community rules. But as he dug deeper, something didn't add up. The HOA board had 5 listed members, but only one name showed up in every section. Karen Thompson, president. The treasurer's name was outdated, the secretary's position pending, and the last 2 seats were marked temporarily vacant. Mark frowned. So it's just her, he muttered. No oversight. No balance. That was the first red flag. But it wasn't the last. He found copies of past newsletters and community fines. Dozens of them. Karen had fined one neighbor for having a non-compliant garden ornament. Another was fined for having their garbage cans out too early. But what really caught Mark's attention was a retired couple fined $300 for unsanctioned noise disturbance. When he checked the details, the disturbance was the sound of their grandson's birthday party. At noon, that made Mark's jaw tighten. This wasn't rule enforcement. It was control. Later that day, Mark decided it was time to talk to people. He began with the house across the street. Mr. Jenkins, a gray-haired man with kind eyes and a lawn so well-kept it looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. "Morning," Mark said as he walked up. Mr. Jenkins looked up from his newspaper. "Ah, you must be the new family Karen's been talking about." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Oh, what you been saying?" The older man chuckled bitterly. "She warned everyone you were disruptive." Mark smiled dryly. "Because my newborn cries." "Don't take it personally," Jenkins said, shaking his head. "Karen's been like that for years. Thinks she's running a military base." Mark smirked. "Trust me, I've been on military bases. They're nicer." The old man laughed, but his expression soon grew serious. "We've all wanted to stand up to her, but she knows how to make people afraid. You cross her, she finds something. Your paint color, your driveway cracks, your mailbox height, and suddenly you're buried in fines." Mark nodded slowly. Fear is a powerful tool, but it only works if people stay quiet. Mr. Jenkins looked curious. "What are you planning to do?" Mark gave a small smile. "Start with the truth. That's usually enough." Over the next few days, Mark went door to door. Each conversation revealed more of the same story. People frustrated, tired, and scared. One woman, Sandra, told him she'd been fined for having her mother's wheelchair ramp visible from the street. Another man said Karen had threatened to tow his car after he parked in front of his own house for too long. It was worse than Mark imagined. The whole community was living under one person's paranoia. He took notes, collecting details like evidence on a mission board. Times, dates, incidents, every piece of information mattered. And as the list grew, so did his determination. On the 5th day, he visited a small blue house near the cul-de-sac where a young couple lived, Brian and Mia, both in their late 20s. Mia answered the door cautiously, but when Mark explained why he was there, her eyes lit up. "Oh, thank God! Someone's finally doing something. We've been waiting for this day." Brian joined her at the door, shaking Mark's hand firmly. "You're the Navy guy, right? Karen mentioned you in one of her alerts. Said you were aggressive." Mark couldn't help but laugh. "Aggressive? No, just not afraid." Brian smiled. "Well, that's more than most of us can say." They invited him in for coffee, and as they talked, Mark realized something. People weren't just angry. They were ready. Ready to push back if someone led the way. That night, after putting Lily to sleep, Mark sat at the kitchen table with Emily. He spread out his notes across the table. Pages of names, dates, finds, and screenshots. Emily stared at the mess of papers. "You've been busy." Mark nodded. "She's been breaking HOA bylaws for years. Half these fines aren't even legal without a full board vote. But no one ever questioned her." Emily frowned. "Because she scares them." "Exactly," Mark said. "She built her power on fear. And fear only works until people stop believing in it." Emily looked at him with admiration. "You're really going to take her down, aren't you?" He smiled faintly. "Not just for us. For everyone she's pushed around." The next day, Mark made a plan. Step 1, gather proof. Step 2, organize the neighbors. Step 3, call a special meeting. By evening, word had spread quietly through the community. People began reaching out, some cautious, others excited. "We're with you," they said. "It's time someone did something." And slowly, something began to shift in Magnolia Ridge. For the first time in years, neighbors started talking to each other again. People waved, shared stories, and whispered about the upcoming meeting Mark had called for following Friday. Karen, of course, noticed. She watched from her window as Mark went from house to house, clipboard in hand. Her eyes narrowed. "What is he doing?" she muttered, her dog yapping at her feet. She had ruled this neighborhood for years with intimidation and letters, but now someone was moving against her, someone she couldn't control. That evening, she sent out an emergency email blast. "Attention! Unauthorized gathering being planned by resident Mark Dalton. This meeting is not sanctioned by the HOA. Attendance could result in fines." Mark read the email and chuckled. She's getting desperate. Emily peeked over his shoulder. "Should we cancel?" He shook his head. "No, we're not breaking the rules. We're following them. Section 8B. Any resident can request a special meeting with signatures from 10% of homeowners." And guess what? He held up his clipboard, covered with signatures. "I got 43%. Emily smiled, pride gleaming in her eyes. "You really did your homework." Mark smirked. "You don't go into battle unprepared." That night, the neighborhood slept quietly, but two people lay awake, one filled with determination, the other with fear. Mark was ready to restore peace. Karen was preparing for war, and the coming HOA meeting, it wasn't just going to be another suburban gathering. It was going to be a reckoning. Friday evening came faster than anyone expected. Magnolia Ridge, once the quiet, postcard-perfect neighborhood, was suddenly buzzing with energy. Porch lights flickered on one by one. The streets filled with murmurs, and small clusters of neighbors gathered, whispering about what was about to happen. For years, Karen had ruled these people through fear and silence. But tonight was different. Tonight, they weren't just coming to listen. They were coming to be heard. The HOA meeting was scheduled at the community hall, a modest brick building near the playground. Normally, only a handful of residents showed up. But when Mark arrived with Emily and baby Lily, the parking lot was already full. Inside, the room was packed shoulder to shoulder. Dozens of people sat in folding chairs, some standing in the back, others holding printed copies of HOA rules. The air was thick with tension. You could feel it, that electric sense that something big was about to unfold. And at the front of the room, behind a long table, sat Karen Thompson. She wore a stiff white blouse and her signature pearl necklace, her face arranged in the perfect mass of authority. Her little stack of papers sat neatly before her, and a microphone stood ready for her to lead the discussion. When Mark entered, Karen's eyes immediately locked onto him. Her smile was cold, rehearsed. "Well, Mr. Dalton," she said into the mic, her voice echoing through the room, "I see you brought quite the crowd for your little event." Mark smiled calmly. "Good evening, Karen. I'm glad so many people came. Shows how much the community cares." Karen's smile faltered just slightly. "Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone that this meeting was not officially sanctioned by the HOA board." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Mark raised his hand politely. "Actually, that's not true. According to Section 8B of the bylaws, any resident can call a special meeting with signatures from 10% of the homeowners." He turned, gesturing toward the crowd. "We got over 40%. Applause broke out real loud and unexpected. Some people even cheered. Karen's face tightened as she banged her little gavel on the table. "Order. Let's maintain decorum." But the mood had already shifted. When the noise quieted, Mark stepped forward. His voice was calm but carried power. "I called this meeting because too many people in this community have been afraid to speak. They've been fined unfairly, silenced unfairly, and treated like criminals in their own homes. That ends tonight." Karen's microphone clicked on. "Mr. Dalton, if you have a specific complaint, please follow protocol and—" Mark interrupted, his tone steady. "This isn't about one complaint, Karen. It's about all of them." He turned toward the crowd. "Who here has been fined or warned unfairly by the HOA?" Almost half the room raised their hands. Gasps followed. Some people even lifted papers, printed letters, warnings, and notices with Karen's signature on them. Karen's composure slipped for a second, but she quickly leaned forward. Those were legitimate actions based on HOA regulations. Mark spoke over her. "You fined the Garcias for their grandson's birthday party. You fined the Jenkins family because their Christmas lights were too bright. You fined Sander for having a wheelchair ramp." Karen's voice rose, sharp and defensive. "Those are exaggerations." "No," Mark said, pulling a folder from his bag. "They're records, straight from your own public reports. You've been acting as judge, jury, and enforcer, without board votes, without documentation, and in several cases, without even notifying people properly." He placed the folder on the table in front of her. "And that, Karen, is a violation of HOA law." The room erupted in whispers and shock. People looked at each other, nodding, muttering things like, "I knew it," and "she's been getting away with this for years." Karen's face flushed deep red. She leaned forward, gripping the microphone. "You have no idea what it takes to manage this community. You think it's easy keeping order? You think everyone can just do whatever they want? I've sacrificed for this neighborhood." Mark's gaze softened, not with pity, but with understanding. "You're right. Leadership takes sacrifice. I've seen that firsthand. But real leadership means protecting people, not controlling them. You've forgotten that." She slammed her hand on the table. "You don't know anything about me." Mark stayed calm. "Maybe not, but I know what you've done." He clicked a remote, and the projector behind him lit up. A slide of Karen's email warnings, fines, and even residents' complaints she'd ignored. Gasps filled the room. "This," Mark said, pointing to the screen, "isn't leadership. It's intimidation." Karen stood abruptly, voice shaking. "This is slander. I'll have you removed." But before she could continue, an older woman from the front row stood up. It was Mrs. Collins, one of the longest living residents. She raised her voice, trembling but strong. "You fined me $200 for my front wreath because you said it was too large. You humiliated me in front of everyone. Karen, enough is enough." Cheers followed. Then another man stood up. "You threatened to have my car towed because I parked in front of my house for 10 minutes. Soon, voices filled the room. Stories, anger, laughter, relief. Years of frustration spilling out at once. Mark stood quietly, letting them speak. He didn't need to say anything more. The truth was speaking for itself. When the room finally settled, Mark spoke again. We're not here to tear anyone down. We're here to rebuild trust. I've spoken to several residents who want to form a new board, one that actually represents everyone. That means fair voting, open records, and transparency. He turned to Karen. You could either step down gracefully and help us fix this, or continue fighting and face an official investigation. The room went silent. Every eye turned toward her. Karen's hands shook. Her voice came out low. You think you can just take this from me? I built this neighborhood. Mark looked her dead in the eye. No, Karen. We built it. Together. And it's time everyone got their voice back. For a long moment, she didn't move. Her lips pressed tight, her pride fighting against the inevitable. Finally, she stood, gathered her papers, and muttered, You'll regret this. And with that, she stormed out, the door slamming behind her like the closing of a chapter. The crowd erupted in applause. People stood, cheering, shaking Mark's hand, some even tearing up. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt alive again. Emily smiled proudly from the back, holding Lily close. Her husband had just done what no one else dared, not with fists, not with anger, but with integrity and truth. Mark looked around the room, humbled. Let's make this place what it should have been all along, a community. As the night ended and people began to leave, laughter filled the air. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years were finally connecting again. Outside, under the soft glow of the streetlights, Mark walked Emily and Lily to their car. You did it, Emily whispered. Mark smiled. No, we did. And as they drove home, he glanced at the quiet houses around him. No longer symbols of fear, but of freedom. Kara might have ruled with control, but Mark had led with courage, and courage always wins in the end. The neighborhood was different after that night. For the first time in years, Magnolia Ridge felt alive. Kids played in front yards again. Neighbors chatted on driveways, and laughter returned to streets that once echoed with silence and fear. The dark cloud Karen had cast over the community had finally lifted. At least, that's what everyone thought. But Karen Thompson wasn't the kind of person who disappeared quietly. After storming out of the HOA meeting, she went straight home, slamming her front door so hard it rattled the windows. Her little dog barked hysterically as she threw her binder onto the counter. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from fury. How dare he, she hissed. That arrogant man humiliated me in front of everyone. She paced the kitchen like a lion in a cage, her mind racing. For years, she'd ruled this neighborhood without question. People listened, people obeyed. And now, because of one newcomer with a military background and a newborn baby, her reputation was in ruins. Karen sat at her dining table, clutching a glass of wine, her thoughts dark and vengeful. He wants to play hero, she muttered. Fine, let's see how he handles a real fight. She grabbed her laptop and began typing furiously. Her HOA email access was still active. The system hadn't been transferred yet, and she planned to use that to her advantage. Within an hour, she had drafted several anonymous complaints about Mark. Accusations of aggressive behavior, noise disturbances, even claims that he threatened residents. She sent them to the local county office, and a few contacts she still had on the old HOA mailing list. Let's see how he likes being on the other side, she whispered. The next morning, Mark woke up to a knock on the door. It wasn't a neighbor this time. It was a city code inspector holding a clipboard. Mr. Dalton, we received multiple reports about unpermitted home renovations and noise complaints. Mind if I take a quick look around? Emily, holding baby Lily, looked alarmed. Unpermitted renovations? We haven't even changed a light bulb. Mark stayed calm. Go ahead, he said, stepping aside. You'll find everything's fine. The inspector did a quick walk-through and left, slightly embarrassed. Sorry for the inconvenience, sir. Seems like a false alarm. Mark nodded politely, but inside his instinct screamed. This wasn't random. Someone had triggered it, and there was only one person who wanted to cause trouble. Karen, that night, after putting Lily to sleep, Mark sat at the table with his laptop, the same place where he'd once planned his mission against her HOA tyranny. But now, he wasn't looking at neighborhood complaints. He was digging deeper. He accessed the HOA's public financial records, something Karen probably assumed no one would ever check. And as he scrolled through reports, his eyes narrowed. There were maintenance charges, thousands of dollars paid to companies that didn't exist, landscaping services, security contracts, and community improvement fees. But when Mark cross-checked the business names online, they came up blank. He sat back, realization dawning. She's been stealing. Every month, small amounts were siphoned from the HOA account to shell companies, all under Karen's signature. It was subtle, buried under jargon and paperwork. But once you knew what to look for, it was obvious. Emily, sitting beside him, whispered, "You think she's been pocketing HOA money?" Mark nodded. For years, probably tens of thousands. No wonder she was desperate to keep control. The next morning, Mark began quietly gathering proof. He contacted a few neighbors who'd worked with the HOA treasurer in the past and discovered that the position had been vacant for almost a year. Karen had been temporarily managing the funds herself. He smiled grimly. That's all the confirmation I need. But Mark knew he couldn't just accuse her publicly again without solid evidence. He needed hard proof, bank records, official documentation. So he reached out to a lawyer who specialized in HOA fraud. The lawyer, a calm man named David Rains, listened carefully as Mark explained everything. When Mark showed him the records, David's eyebrows shot up. "This," he said slowly, "is serious. If what you're showing me checks out, it's not just a civil issue. It's embezzlement." Mark nodded. "Can we prove it?" David smiled faintly. "With your organization skills?" "Absolutely. Just give me the rest of the files." Meanwhile, Karen's paranoia was growing. Every time she drove down Magnolia Ridge, she saw people smiling at Mark, waving at Emily, playing with her kids on the lawn. The neighborhood she once controlled now belonged to him, and it infuriated her. She started leaving anonymous notes in mailboxes, reminders about rules and fines that no longer applied. She even tried to call an emergency HOA meeting of her own, but nobody showed up. Her phone calls went unanswered. Her emails bounced back. The power she once held with a simple signature was gone, and she couldn't stand it. By the end of the week, Karen's obsession had turned into desperation. Late one night, she snuck out of her house with a flashlight, walking quietly across lawns toward the Dalton home. She looked through their window, seething as she saw Mark and Emily laughing quietly on the couch. "He thinks he's safe," she whispered, her voice trembling with anger. "He doesn't know who he's dealing with." But what she didn't know was that Mark's security cameras caught everything. The next morning, he watched the footage. Karen creeping through his yard at 1:17 a.m. He shook his head. "She's losing it." He sent the footage straight to his lawyer. "Add this to the file," he wrote. "Looks like harassment's part of the story, too." A few days later, Mark got a call from David, the lawyer. "Mark," David said, excitement in his voice. "We got it. We subpoenaed the HOA bank account records. Karen's been transferring funds to a fake landscaping company, one registered in her cousin's name, over $50,000 in the past 2 years." Mark exhaled. "So we can make this official?" David nodded. "We're filing a report with the county fraud division tomorrow. She's going to be investigated." Mark leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. Good. She hurt a lot of people here. Time she faced the consequences. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the houses, Emily joined him on the porch, holding Lily. "Do you think it's over now?" she asked softly. Mark looked out over the street, peaceful, quiet, calm again. "Almost," he said, "but she's not the type to go down quietly. We should be ready for one last push." Emily nodded, trusting his instincts. "You always are." He smiled. "That's the Navy in me." Across the street, behind closed blinds, Karen sat alone in the dark. Her phone buzzed with an email, a notification from the county office about the fraud complaint filed under her name. Her hand trembled as she opened it. Her breath caught. "This can't be happening," she whispered, panic spreading through her chest. "He's trying to destroy me." But deep down, she knew the truth. She destroyed herself. Still, as she looked out her window and saw Mark holding his baby girl, something inside her snapped again. "If he wants a war," she muttered, her eyes cold and determined, "then he's going to get one." The battle wasn't over. Not yet, because for Karen Thompson, losing power wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of revenge. For a few quiet days, peace returned to Magnolia Ridge. The birds chirped in the mornings, kids laughed on their bikes, and neighbors waved cheerfully when Mark and Emily passed by with baby Lily. After months of tension, the neighborhood finally felt like a home again. But Mark's instincts told him it was too quiet. Years of training as a Navy SEAL had taught him one rule that had saved his life countless times. When the world goes silent, something's coming. He couldn't shake that feeling now. On the surface, Karen Thompson had vanished. Her blinds stayed closed. Her mailbox overflowed with letters she refused to open. The once perfectly trimmed lawn in front of her house now looked wild, untamed, like a reflection of the chaos inside her mind. But behind those closed curtains, Karen wasn't idle. She sat at her dining table surrounded by piles of papers. HOA documents, legal letters, screenshots, and newspaper clippings. The fraud accusation had shaken her to the core. Her lawyer had already called, warning her that investigators were looking into the HOA accounts. She was facing the possibility of jail time. For someone who'd spent her entire life controlling others, the idea of losing control terrified her. She took a long sip of wine and glared at her reflection in the dark window. "He thinks he's some kind of hero," she whispered. "He humiliated me, stole my power, and now he wants to destroy me. Well, let's see how he feels when everything he loves is taken from him." Her voice trembled with venom. That's when she opened her laptop and began searching. Mark didn't know it yet, but Karen had found his old military profile, an archived article about his time overseas, a mention of his special operations unit, even a photo of him in uniform. She smiled coldly as she read. "A Navy SEAL," she murmured. "Perfect. Let's see how the city reacts when they think their new neighbor is a violent man with a record." She started making anonymous calls to the county office, to Child Protective Services, even to the police. Her story was detailed, rehearsed, and dripping with fake concern. "I'm just a worried neighbor," she said sweetly. "That man across the street, the one who calls himself a Navy SEAL, I think he's dangerous. I've heard yelling at night. I've seen him carrying weapons. And he's always so intense around his baby. I'm worried for that child's safety." Every word was a lie, but to the person on the other end of the phone, it sounded serious enough to file a report. 3 days later, when Mark opened his front door to see 2 officers standing there, he immediately knew this wasn't a casual visit. "Mr. Dalton," one of them said, "we received a call regarding a concern for child welfare. Would you mind answering a few questions?" Emily froze. "What?" Mark stayed calm, as always. "Of course. Come in." They stepped inside, their eyes scanning the neat, warm living room. Baby Lily gurgled happily in her crib. Emily tried to explain. No yelling, no violence, just a false report. Mark handed over his military ID and his discharge papers. "Everything I do is legal. You're welcome to look around." The officers quickly realized there was no danger here. "Sorry, sir," one said quietly. "We have to respond to every complaint. But from what we see, you're doing everything right." Mark nodded. "I understand. Thank you for your time." When the door closed, Emily's voice cracked. "She did this, didn't she?" Mark nodded, his jaw tightening. "Yeah, she's getting desperate." That night, he sat outside on the porch long after Emily and Lily went to bed. The moonlight glowed faintly over the houses, and the soft hum of crickets filled the air. But Mark's mind was alert, his instinct sharp. Karen had crossed a line, and he knew it was only a matter of time before she went further. He checked his home security cameras, repositioned them to cover every angle, even the back fence. Then he set up motion sensors by the driveway. If she tried anything again, he'd know instantly. 2 nights later, the storm came. Thunder rolled across the sky. Rain slashing the streets like angry waves. Mark was about to turn off the living room light when he caught something on the camera feed. Movement by the gate. A shadow. He zoomed in. It was Karen, soaked from head to toe. She was crouched by his car, holding something metallic. For a moment, he thought she was vandalizing it. Then he realized she was pouring something. Gasoline. Mark's heart slammed in his chest. He moved fast, quietly grabbing his rain jacket and stepping out the side door. The rain masked his footsteps perfectly, the kind of condition he'd trained for years to use to his advantage. Karen didn't see him until his voice cut through the storm. Put down. She froze. The can slipped from her hand, clattering onto the pavement. Her face twisted, fear flashing for just a second before anger replaced it. You ruined my life, she screamed over the thunder. You think you're some hero? You made me a criminal. Mark stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. You did that to yourself, Karen. Walk away now. This is your last chance. But she didn't. She lunged toward his porch, shouting incoherently. Mark caught her wrist mid-swing, not with violence, just enough strength to stop her. Stop, he said sharply. The police sirens wailed in the distance. His cameras had already alerted the system. Karen's face went pale. For the first time, she realized she wasn't in control anymore. Within minutes, flashing red and blue lights filled the street. Officers poured in, separating them as neighbors peeked out from their windows. Shocked. Karen tried to explain, but her story unraveled immediately when the police found a gas can and saw the camera footage. She was handcuffed, screaming as they led her away. You'll regret this, Mark. You'll all regret this. Mark didn't reply. He just stood there, drenched in rain, holding Emily close as she came running with the baby. It's over, she whispered, trembling. Mark nodded slowly, looking at the flashing lights fading into the distance. For her, maybe, but not for us. We still have to heal from what she's done. The next morning, the news spread across Magnolia Ridge. Neighbors who once feared Karen now openly talked about her arrest. Some brought food and flowers to the Daltons, thanking Mark for standing up when no one else could. He didn't feel like a hero. He just felt relieved. As the sun broke through the clouds, Mark sat on the porch holding Lily, her tiny fingers gripping his. He smiled softly. You're safe now, he whispered, and no one will ever take that from you. Emily looked at him, eyes full of pride. You didn't just save us, Mark. You saved this whole neighborhood. Mark glanced at the house across the street, Karen's empty, silent home, and exhaled. Maybe now, he said quietly, we can finally live in peace. But in the police station downtown, Karen sat alone in a cold cell, staring at the wall, silent, defeated yet not broken. Her eyes were cold, focused, and as a guard passed by, she whispered to herself, it's not over. A week had passed since the night of the storm. Magnolia Ridge was quiet again, the kind of quiet that Mark had longed for since moving in. The HOA was being audited, new leadership was stepping in, and Karen's arrest had become the talk of the entire county. News crews had even shown up outside the gates, reporting on the HOA president gone rogue. Mark had no interest in fame. He just wanted his family back to normal. Morning coffee on the porch, laughter in the house, Lily's tiny giggles echoing down the hallway. But peace, as he'd learned from years of war, was fragile. And sometimes the biggest threats come when you let your guard down. Inside the county jail, Karen sat on a narrow bunk, staring at the blank wall. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering slightly. Her face had lost its polish. Makeup gone, hair a tangled mess, but her eyes burned with the same bitter fire. The other inmates gave her space. There was something unsettling about the way she sat there, whispering to herself, replaying every detail of her downfall. This isn't how it ends, she murmured. He took everything from me. My position, my reputation, my home. He made me a joke. Her hands clenched into fists. And then, in that cold, empty cell, she began a plan. Karen wasn't stupid. Before her arrest, she'd been the queen of control, running the HOA like a dictatorship, manipulating neighbors, forging documents, hiding money. That same cunning mind was now focused on one thing, Revenge. During visitation hours, she managed to call her cousin Dennis, a shady handyman who owed her a favor. "Listen carefully," she whispered through the receiver. "I need you to get something from my house, a flash drive hidden under the floorboard in my office, and I want you to deliver it." "Deliver it where?" Dennis asked, confused. "To the reporter covering the Dalton story. Tell him it's proof Mark Dalton isn't who he says he is." Dennis frowned. "But isn't he just some Navy guy?" Karen's lips curled into a smile. "Exactly. Which means the world will believe anything about him. The military hide secrets, don't they? Let's give them one to chase." 2 days later, the evening news ran a segment that made Mark's stomach drop. "Breaking tonight. New allegations have surfaced against former Navy SEAL Mark Dalton. An anonymous source claims Dalton was dishonorably discharged following an incident overseas. Military officials have not commented." Emily gasped. "What? That's not true, right?" "Of course it's not," Mark said, grabbing the remote. This is her doing." But even though it was a lie, the damage was done. The internet ran with it, blogs, forums, even social media posts questioning his past. Neighbors who had once waved now avoided eye contact. Some whispered as he walked by. A few even said, "You can never tell with those military types." It hit Emily hard. She felt like they were reliving the nightmare all over again. "Mark, can't we just move?" she pleaded one night. "Start over somewhere else?" He shook his head. "Running only gives her what she wants. I've fought harder battles than this, and I'm not letting her win." But deep down, even Mark felt something stirring. Not fear, but exhaustion. He'd been strong for so long. For his wife, his daughter, his home. But now he realized even heroes can only take so much before they break. A week later, Mark received a call from a private investigator he'd hired after Karen's arrest. "Dalton, you might want to hear this," the man said. "Your HOA president? She's been sending letters from jail. To journalists, to city officials, to your former military contacts. She's spreading lies, saying you're unstable, violent, even that you faked your service record." Mark closed his eyes and sighed. "She's trying to bury me." The investigator hesitated. "It's worse. One of the letters was intercepted. She's trying to get someone to come after you. Claims you're a danger to your own kid." That was the moment something in Mark changed. He wasn't just defending his name anymore. He was protecting his family from a woman who refused to stop, even behind bars. The next day, Mark went to the jail to face her one last time. The guard hesitated, but eventually led him to the visitation room. Karen looked up as he entered, surprise flashing in her eyes, then amusement. "Well, if it isn't the neighborhood hero," she sneered. "Come to gloat?" Mark sat down across from her, calm and unshaken. "No, I came to understand why." "Why what?" "Why you hate us so much. You don't even know us, Karen. You don't know my wife, my daughter. You just decided we were your enemy." She leaned forward, her voice cold. "Because people like you always get away with everything. You walk in, act like you're better than everyone, and everyone eats it up. The soldier, the hero, the savior. And people like me, we get ignored. We get replaced. Not this time." Mark stared at her for a long moment. "You think destroying others makes you powerful, but it's what makes you weak. You don't lead, you control. You don't build, you destroy. That's why you lost." Karen smirked. "We'll see who really lost when the world turns on you." He stood up slowly. "It already has. But I'll still walk out of here to my family. You'll stay in this cell. That's the difference between us." For a moment, her mask cracked, her eyes filled with rage. She slammed her hand against the glass. "You can't stop me." Mark leaned closer, his tone low and final. "I already did." Then he walked out, leaving her shouting behind the glass as the guards pulled her back. That night, as rain pattered softly on the roof, Emily sat by the window with Lily asleep in her arms. Mark joined her, silent for a while before saying, "It's finally done." She nodded. "You think she'll ever stop?" He looked out at the dark horizon. "Maybe not, but she can't reach us anymore. and I'm done living in her shadow. Emily smiled faintly. You know, I used to wish for a quiet life, but I think I've learned something from all this. What's that? Peace doesn't come from silence. It comes from standing up for it. Mark smiled, wrapping an arm around her. You're right. Outside, the storm finally cleared. The moonlight glowed across the wet street, and the house that once felt like a battlefield now stood calm, strong, alive. For the first time in months, Mark felt something deep in his chest. Not just relief, but pride. He hadn't just defeated Karen. He'd reclaimed his peace, his family, and his purpose. And this time, nothing, not rumors, not lies, not hate, could take that away. The morning sun rose over Magnolia Ridge like a quiet promise, soft golden light spilling across the lawns, catching dew on grass, and glinting off the windows of homes that finally knew peace again. For the first time in months, the air didn't feel heavy with tension. The neighborhood was changing. Kids were playing outside again. Neighbors were chatting over fences. And even the air felt lighter, like everyone had finally taken a deep breath after holding it for too long. And at the heart of that peace was one man, a father, a husband, a soldier who had fought his final battle not on foreign soil, but in his own backyard. Mark Dalton stood in front of his house, coffee in one hand, baby monitor in the other. He watched as Emily rocked Lily on the porch swing, her laughter soft and free. The wind caught her hair, and for a moment, Mark just stood there, smiling. It was over. Finally, Karen was behind bars. The HOA was rebuilding under new management, and the truth about Mark's service record had come out publicly. The Navy had released a statement confirming his honorable discharge and praising his years of service. The news cycle shifted, and the lies evaporated like fog under sun. But even with the world set right again, Mark knew peace wasn't just the absence of conflict. It was the courage to protect it. That afternoon, he decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. It felt strange. In the early days, his walks were filled with glares, whispers, and tension. Now, people waved and smiled. Morning, Mark. One neighbor called out, Hey, we're planning a neighborhood barbecue this weekend. You and Emily should come. He smiled. We'll be there. Another woman from across the street brought over a basket of muffins. For your family, she said warmly. You gave us all the courage to stand up to her. Mark accepted it with a humble nod. I didn't do it alone. You all did your part too. But deep down, he knew that wasn't completely true. Most people had been too scared to speak up, and he understood that fear. Karen had ruled through intimidation for years. Sometimes it only takes one person refusing to bow to break the spell. And in his case, that person had been him. Later that day, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned orange, Mark found himself standing near the neighborhood park. The swings creaked gently in the wind, and a few children were playing tag under the big oak tree. He smiled, remembering how tense this place had once felt. Where even laughter sounded like rebellion, now it was full of life again. A familiar voice broke his thoughts. You know, I didn't think I'd ever see kids playing here again. He turned. It was Greg, the HOA's new interim president, a soft-spoken man who had once been too afraid to confront Karen. Mark nodded. She had everyone scared. Yeah, Greg admitted. But after what you did, things changed. People realized they didn't have to take it, that they had a choice. Mark looked toward the children. That's all I ever wanted, for people to feel safe, for my daughter to grow up in a place that doesn't teach her to be afraid of standing up for what's right. Greg smiled. You've already made that happen. They shook hands before parting ways. As Mark walked home, he felt lighter, like the weight he'd carried since moving there had finally lifted. That night, the Daltons had dinner on the porch. Emily, Mark, and little Lily cooing happily in her high chair. The crickets sang. The warm breeze drifted by, and the faint glow of the streetlights painted everything in soft gold. Emily raised her glass. To us. To peace. Mark smiled. To never backing down from what's right. She leaned her head on his shoulder. You know, for someone who's been through war, I think this might have been your toughest battle. He chuckled. You're not wrong. But you didn't just fight her, Emily continued softly. You showed everyone what real strength looks like. not in anger, not in shouting, but in standing your ground with integrity. Mark looked at her, eyes gentle. You and Lily gave me that strength. Everything I've done was for us. Emily smiled through tears. And you won. As the night deepened, Mark found himself walking outside once more, drawn by the stillness. The moon hung high, casting silver light over the quiet street. He stopped in front of Karen's old house. The windows were dark, empty. A for sale sign swayed gently in the wind. For a long moment, he stood there, not in anger, not in triumph, but in reflection. He thought about the woman who had tried to destroy him, about how fear and control had consumed her until it took everything from her. And for the first time, Mark didn't feel hate. He just felt pity, because he realized something profound. The real battle wasn't between him and Karen. It was between compassion and cruelty, between truth and manipulation, between peace and fear. And the truth had won. Months passed. Spring turned to summer. Lily learned her first word. Da-da. Emily caught on camera, and Mark couldn't stop replaying it, smiling like a kid every time. The neighborhood continued to heal. The HOA rebuilt under honest leadership. A community garden was started in the empty lot near the park. And at the opening ceremony, Greg asked Mark to say a few words. He wasn't used to speeches, but he looked out at the crowd, neighbors, kids, families, and decided to speak from the heart. You know, he began, when I first moved here, I thought peace meant silence, no noise, no problems, no conflict. But I've learned something different. Real peace isn't quiet. It's full of life, of laughter, of people caring for each other. It's not something you wait for. It's something you fight for. He paused, looking down at Lily and Emily's arms. And sometimes the biggest battles aren't fought overseas. They're fought right here, in the places we call home. The enemy isn't always a person. Sometimes it's fear, pride, or hate. But as long as we stand together, they'll never win. The crowd erupted in applause. That night, as the stars shimmered above Magnolia Ridge, Mark held Lily close, feeling her tiny heartbeat against his chest. He whispered softly, "You're going to grow up in a better world, little one, because your dad never stopped fighting for it." Emily stood beside him, slipping her hand into his. Together, they looked out over their quiet street, their safe, peaceful home. And for the first time, Mark knew he didn't need a mission, a battlefield, or a uniform to be a hero. He just needed his family, because protecting them, that was his truest, greatest victory.